Well, welcome everyone. We welcome you all to the Future Trends Forum. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm your host and cat herder for the day. I'm very, very glad to see you all here. Today, we're going to be talking about automation and the future of education. But first, let me introduce you to the forum, where it comes from and how it works. Now, first, you should know that the Future Trends Forum is now growth of my Future Trends in Technology and Education project. FTTE is a monthly report which takes a look at current trends in technology and education, trying to extrapolate from them in order to understand the future of education. If you haven't seen it before, go to ftte.us or follow the hashtag FTTE and you can learn more. Now, we can't do this without support, and we have two very, very generous sponsors who have helped us out a great deal. One is NiserNet from New York State, a terrific group who have been very generous, and we thank them for it. And the other sponsor, a little bit more evident, is Shindig. And Shindig has provided us with support in two ways. One is, as you can see, the technology we're using, and I'll say a bit more about that in a second, but also behind the scenes, they provide a tremendous staff who've helped us out in every aspect to produce Future Trends Forum. So for all of that support, we thank Shindig. Now, speaking of Shindig, that's the technology we're using right now. This is a video conferencing platform that gives you a chance to participate in 4 different ways. So let me just show you. First of all, up here where I am and where these slides are, right here, this is called the stage. And if you would like to come up on stage and interact with us, simply reach down the very bottom of your screen, the bottom right, there'll be a little red button that says raise and a picture of a hand. If you click that, that gets in our line. We know that you're ready to come up on stage and talk. So if your mic is working, your camera is working, you've got something to say, a question, a comment, or reflection, please click that and we can haul you up on stage. Now, if you don't want to come up on stage, if you're shy or if you're in a public spot or your camera isn't working, whatever, that's fine. Click the next red, a little orange button that says ask. Type in your question, comment, or reflection, and we can display that and I can read it out loud so everyone can see it. Now, the other thing you can do is talk to your peers, and there are a couple of different ways of doing that. One we're going to show you in about 25 minutes, but the other is by chatting with them. So if you mouse over your cursor, over your icon rather, you'll see a little box that says I am chat. Click there, and you'll get access to the chat room that you're in. So you can ask questions, make comments, and get to know people. Right now, in the chat room that I started off in, we're hearing from people in Mexico City, Virginia, California, and Cambridge, Mass. So if you haven't used it before, just click it and say hi. And the last method, if you prefer Twitter, please go over to Twitter and tweet to FTTE. That's the hashtag to use. We'll be monitoring that throughout and recording it as well. So with that sense of our very, very active room, let me just proceed. Let me proceed by welcoming our guest. So today, we'd like to welcome Larry Johnson. Now, Larry is the founder of Ed Futures, which is a new operation. And he's also very well known as the long-running CEO of the New Media Consortium. There he led, among other things, the Horizon Report. And you can learn a great deal about him from either larryjohnson.co or from www.edfutures.org. I've known Larry for coming up on 20 years. He's a brilliant thinker, a great futurist, and a good friend. So, Shindig folks, if you could bring the PowerPoint presentation off the stage and haul Larry up, we could start talking. Greetings, Larry. Welcome aboard.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Very good. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
You're in Mexico City, right?
Looking forward to this conversation now since we began brainstorming about it a couple of months ago. It's nice to finally be here. And here being for me, Mexico City, as things work out, I'm down here to work with some colleagues on a project, and it's nice to take a break from that to visit with all of you.
Well, we're glad to make that possible, and we're glad for the time. Thank you. So there's a lot to talk about. We have the general field of artificial intelligence, automation, and machine learning for education. This is a field that a couple of generations old, but it's starting to take off and has a huge amount of potential. So to begin with, why don't we talk a bit about the pace of AI and machine learning? What's going on with facial recognition, automated attendance, pattern recognition?
Well, the whole field has been referred to as an overnight sensation, 60 years in the making, because the roots of artificial intelligence go back to the very beginnings of computer science and our ability to work with these machines, and visionaries began to think about how it might one day turn out. And so over the summer, I took a little hiatus to do a deep dive into this space, and I've just been amazed by how widespread it is. I'm seeing it everywhere. The obvious things are, if you think about for example, Facebook's ability to do facial recognition is based on a deep learning algorithm that has been being worked on for decades, actually, but in the last couple of years it's just exploded. And the basic idea is that it generates an image into a set of vectors at one level of processing. Hold on just a second. I'm hearing the speaker. We've got another computer in the room here, so I want to make sure that we're not causing interference. But it turns the image into a set of vectors and then processes it through a series of steps that initially might report back from the program, I think that we found an eye. And so then it would move up to another level of processing. It says, well, is there another eye that's out there? And then they find another eye, and they'll go, oh, and well, then, maybe it's a face if there's two eyes. And so it looks to see if it can find other attributes of a face, and gradually moves up between 12 and 15 different steps or levels of programming to finally, in microseconds, identify a particular face as uniquely mine or yours or someone else's. We don't even really think of that as technology, is why I think that's remarkable, because the amount of computing power that's behind it and the sophistication of the technology and the algorithms and the machinery that makes it possible is almost science fiction when you dig down deep into it. And the advances in statistics and other sorts of other sciences that have made it possible for us to do those kinds of things. Yet in the consumer space, people just snap it up. It's not technology anymore. It's just a cool thing. And you go to call up your bank, your credit card company, or some other multinational sort of service company, and you get somebody on the phone, and we've all joked about automated attendance for years, but all of a sudden they actually can talk to you. They have a limited number of topics they can talk about, but they say, well, my name is Jason and I'm here to help you. Y también hablo español. And you don't have to type in the keypad anymore. You just talk. And sometime in the last 6 months, these moved from really clunky, very awkward sorts of tools to tools now that are surprisingly sophisticated. And the reason is because of machine learning. They have developed new methods of doing this that allow every single interaction that you have with that artificial intelligence to continue to train it. And so, for example, at Amazon, their recommendation engine is really just looking for patterns, and it is able to analyze something like 30 million patterns a minute worldwide. And you think about that level of big data in real time, it's getting to be scarily accurate. I mean, in the sense that I will go maybe and do a web search for something that I'm interested in, like camera lens or something, and then I'll be over on Amazon, and there's the very lens I was thinking about, ready for me to buy. It's coming on in every sector that I see, and it's coming on very, very fast. And so it's inevitable that we're going to start seeing it in education sometime very soon. Um, you know, and the way it's unfolding, there's the pace of it, which is so incredibly fast that we're not even noticing change. But also the way that it's coming in is in a different way than we typically talk about it. And I have a video that I wanted to share with folks. Let me put that in here um, in the chat because it talks about the difference between um, how we view these sorts of things in the Western world and how they're viewed in Japan. And in Japan, robots and artificial intelligences are things that save the world. They're heroes. And of course, in our cinematic history, in our mythology, robots it's the war of the worlds. They're here to destroy us, and it's and they're smart and they're super intelligent, and so we have really smart people, writing about the singularity and when we're actually going to have machines that pass the Turing test and become smarter than we are, and then what will we do? Well, I recently read Kevin Kelly's new book, and he has a very interesting, different perspective on that. And his view is that there's not really going to be any money in destroying the world kind of robots. And so the people that can build robots are probably not going to build those. And instead, they're going to build the kinds of intelligences that can be sold. And so just in the last week, we've had two big announcements related to automated cars, for example. Ford has announced that within 5 years, they'll be marketing a car with no steering wheel, no brakes, no pedals of any kind, to be a driverless livery car, a taxi, basically. There are other companies that are doing the same thing for trucks on the highway. And then today, Uber announced a big project in Pittsburgh with Volvo. They're delivering 100 autonomous cars to Pittsburgh to begin piloting driverless. Initially, they'll have people sitting in the driver's seat, but their goal, of course, is driverless autonomous vehicles. This is not out in the future anymore. These things are here today. And Kelly's perspective on this is very interesting. It's that these specialized artificial intelligences will become something that we probably would begin to call something like cognification. And so in the same way that at the turn of the century, smart people sat down and figured out how to electrify a washing machine, how to electrify something to clean your carpets, how to electrify something to wash your dishes, and so forth. The basic way to become a millionaire in the early 21st century was take X and make it electrical. And his point is the way that you're going to become a millionaire in our time and in our children's time is to take X and make it smart. And so your refrigerator is going to have a sophisticated intelligence about what a refrigerator should do. And it'll be able to tell and monitor your food for age and,
right.
differences in temperature and even order food for you. Other intelligences that are already in the marketplace are far more sophisticated, like the Watson. We've all heard about Watson and how it could play Jeopardy and Google's brain that can be super sophisticated at Go. But IBM is seriously marketing now a generalized intelligence around Watson that it's encouraging us all to contribute to. And based on the questions that we ask Watson, Watson will begin to learn the answers to things that we care about in the same way that the intelligence behind Google searches answers a search. If we put in the exact same search terms, Google will give me a different result than it will give you because it has the entire history of what I've clicked on from what they've given me, and it refines it every time I use it. Well, they've done the same thing with Watson in two domains that I think are really interesting. One is the legal field, and they've uploaded every bit of case law, every bit of relevant information that a seriously qualified Supreme Court level, legal assistant would be doing to help a legal team to prepare. And this system has been hired by one of the top law firms in the country. I'll put that in the chat as well. And they call it Ross. And Ross is a lawyer and working with a law firm. And then at the Cleveland Clinic, they're working with a medical Watson that is soon already doing amazing things, but soon will probably be the most sophisticated expert that we have on the planet. And imagine a doctor being able to interact with this. And when you see the people talking about their experiences with Watson, the Watson medical system, they refer to it as like talking with a learned colleague. And I want to emphasize that first word, because they're not typing with a learned colleague. They're not searching a learned colleague. They're talking like we are, in natural language, asking questions and getting natural language responses. The ability of these machines to do image recognition in natural language or solve problems today. And so that's kind of where we're at with this. It's just an amazing time.
That's fantastic. Larry, let me pause you for a second. First, let me say to everybody, if you've got questions or comments about what Larry's describing, please use one of the means I mentioned before, either the chat box in your chat room, or click the orange buttons to raise your hand or to ask a question. We're already getting some commentary on Twitter, which is great. Second, this is a tremendous topic. Larry, I love the analogy to electrification 100 years ago. This seems like what Kelly calls cognification is really enormous. I guess I can see this approaching education in two different ways. One is the external way, that we're preparing students for a world where automation and artificial intelligence are becoming more and more mainstream. So we have to think about how we change education to respond to that. And the second is how this applies directly to education. So why don't you grab one of those? Where do you see this impacting education?
Well, imagine what they've done with Watson in the legal and medical domains. Why couldn't that be extended? And I'm certain that there are people, smart people, really smart people at IBM already working on this. Why couldn't it be extended to just about any discipline? Engineering is an obvious one. Another obvious one would be, if they're going to do it with medical, maybe they do it with psychological, or maybe, as we're thinking about smart cities now, there's a sociological expert that can be part of the equation. And you could just kind of tick down right on through it. And where it gets really interesting for me is recognizing that natural language communication with these artificial intelligences is largely a solved problem across many languages. So you can imagine Watson meets Siri, and you're doing this on your mobile device. Here you are, and you have a question, and you ask, your Watson tutor, you want to learn, you start with Watson. You ask Watson a question. In the same way that we've been typing into Google, and I don't know if the audience has noticed, but you can type any kind of question into Google. It's very, very comfortable with questions. And they even have a voice feature now for Google, so you can talk to it as well. It is literally the next step that we begin to see artificial intelligences that can help you with your writing, with your math, with your chemical bonds, and those sorts of things. Already at Georgia Tech, they did an experiment last term where they had an artificially intelligent TA. And this TA didn't use natural language. It was all in text. But what was amazing, And when I've told this story before, people said, "Yeah, that jives with the TAs I knew in school," but no one could tell the difference. Point. And you can have that be, "Wow, that's really cool," or "Oh, well, that's not so surprising." But I think it is surprising. I think that when we consider these very narrow domains, in the Kelly sense, that we have artificial intelligences that go deep in a narrow way, not the singularity kind of intelligence that Kurzweil talks about or Musk talks about, but
right.
these specialized AIs, it just becomes something that I think is going to come on very, very fast. Now the question becomes, and I've been trying to think through this a lot: who's the customer? Is this a direct-to-consumer sort of thing? Is it marketed at home schools? Is it something that they market as an enterprise system to a university in the same way that we used to see lynda.com being marketed to a university to provide professional development? What are the business models that could work for this? Well, I think you could probably see all of those business models. And so I've kind of come to the point where it's not like I'm thinking that this is at all far away. I'm thinking we should be talking about this a lot more. We should be, trying to think about what is it that we really would like to see, because I think that there are people out there that would like to make those things happen and could do that certainly in the next 5 years, and maybe even sooner. So maybe I'll stop there.
So it's either going to be in Uber time or Ford time.
Or both, and there'll be competition because all of the major manufacturers of cars, going back to that, are all working on this. So, and Google and Apple, people that are not even car companies. And then you extend that out to the logistics field, trucking and shipping and all of that. Why should we put up with a drunk captain that wrecks, the Valdez, and dumps a bunch of oil on a reef that everybody already knew about? A robot would never do that. That's kind of Kelly's point too, is that, like your car robot isn't going to have a conversation with you about philosophy, because what it does is it drives a car. That's what it's supposed to do.
Right.
And you can imagine that they could get very good at that.
Well, there's also one business model angle, which is the insurance angle. We saw a poll last week that showed people over 55 were increasingly likely to want to drive a car that had automated systems for safety. So it'd be interesting to see seniors moving towards some degree of self-driving cars, which made me think,
I like that idea.
If we could have autonomous car that would actually improve safety, there's the human improvement that we might stop killing 30,000 people a year in America's roads, but also imagine insurance companies rewarding you for having such a car with lower rates, and then eventually punishing you if you are driving yourself by jacking up your rates. So the business model has that insurance angle to it, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Back to education. Have you? Oh, sorry. There's a little lag here. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to make one more comment about cars because it's so fascinating to watch. But the technical challenge in automating a car is the transition from the human to the computer. If the human's driving all the time, that's fairly simple, and if the computer's driving all the time, that's fairly simple. But it's having a car that can transfer things in an instant back to the human, that's the challenging part. And so, I could definitely see insurance companies giving you a break if you got a car with no pedals and no steering wheel.
So let's take that to the education realm. What if we have a tutor who is as good as the average teacher in a certain subject? And let's say it's a quantifiable subject like math or a foreign language. And let's give it maybe a year to get better than the average teacher. In that case, would it be ethically wrong to not employ one? When do we get students, parents, the public, boards demanding that we use these tutors instead of humans?
So I don't like to think about a future like that, but when I find myself encountered by that sort of scenario, I remind myself that even if we just look back at the last 100 years of the tremendous change that has happened in the lifetime of us, our parents, and our grandparents, um, we're not faced with 30–40% unemployment generally. I mean, there have been bad times in Europe and particularly Spain where they've seen segments of that. And I'm not trying to minimize those sorts of things, but generally, as some jobs are taken over by automation, others come along and replace it, and they become new things. Like who knew that social um, optimization was going to, SEO was going to be a job. Who knew, or even, I mean, it's been around a long time now, but even web designers, uh, there are lots and lots of new jobs. Data scientists, for example, brand new job. Um, and and so my hope is that if that happens, and to a certain degree, I think there are going to be instances where it might, that we're going to find other uses for these really committed sorts of teachers. I think there's always going to be a place for us to be inspired by a fellow human. That, and I think about some of the great teachers that I've had. I don't care how smart the tutor is. They're not going to connect to me on that human level in a way that makes me just want to be like them. Um, at the same time, though, I think that if a teacher is freed up to know that any question that a student has, any fact that a student needs to know about, any bit of background they need is at their fingertips in a natural, intuitive, human language sort of way, in any language you want, then what does it mean to be a teacher at that point? I think it becomes a very exciting equation to think about, and the teachers are the ones that then help us to understand what it means to be a good citizen, what it means to be ethical, what it means to how to think globally, how to think about the world in a way that is good for the planet. It sounds a little bit like. Yeah, but those kinds of students are the ones that we want to train. That's been part of our conversations I've been in here in Mexico, is how important it is to not just train professionals, but to train professionals with a deep moral compass. I think that we're always going to need humans for that. I think that there's a reason we call it the humanities, is because that's the part and parcel of who we are. Now, I can imagine a tutor that could talk to you in great depth about a particular author, Dostoevsky, and talk about what are the themes, and probably go pretty deep with you into that. Um, but I still remember the great literature teachers that I've interacted with in my training, and the way that they internalized it for me. I think is a skill that we'll still be looking for in teachers no matter what.
So we may, instead of replacing teachers, we may augment teachers, or tutors work alongside teachers.
I think tutors working alongside teachers is where it's going to go. And when you think about, and I keep referring to Kelly, this is the book I just put down, so it's very much in my mind. But he talked about companion.
It's a good book.
Yeah, it is a good book. He talks about a robot called Baxter, for example, that is designed from the get-go to work right next to you and to be your work companion. And so you can offload things to Baxter, who always smiles, who's always happy to help, who's always there, who never gets tired, never gets grumpy, never has to take a break. Baxter's right there to help you. I think that these tutors, could be like that they would be the teacher's companion, so that if the teacher had a question and is going, like, let's say it was called Baxter or whatever the name might be for the tutor, Siri, I'm thinking deeply about how to get people engaged in the election in my class, but I don't want it to be overtly political, and I don't want to revert to the same old storylines that you're seeing in the news, and have an interaction like you would, like the doctors were talking about, with a learned colleague. Help me think this through. Help me see a different doorway into how I might approach this. That would be awesome. I would love to have that kind of a companion.
Have you seen the Frank Langella movie called Robot and Frank?
No, but if you're recommending
I really recommend it. It's very sweet. It's about a retired man who you learn swiftly used to be a burglar, and about how he gets assigned a robot to help him in his retirement, and he starts training the robot to be a burglar. It's a lovely, really sweet movie. But that's the backstory.
Yeah. Well, also in the news in the last 10 days.
Paul B.
Oh, okay. Let's listen to Paul.
Okay. Why don't you get Zach? Can you just bring that up on the screen? So Paul's question has to do with the senses. So he wonders, driving a car the conventional way allows a human to use their 5 senses. If you automate cars, the user experience of driving is forever changed. I guess that's not a question, it's a comment. That's an interesting observation. Paul, if you want to say more about that in chat, go ahead. Larry, what do you think about that?
Well, I think BMW is going to have to, think about their marketing in that sort of scenario. But I think, we'll just have to see how it unfolds. I don't necessarily see all cars being replaced. I mean, let's think about how technology's been implemented in our own lifetimes. The old stuff is still around. People still like vinyl records. Who knew? Tube technology is having a resurgence because it makes a very, very warm kind of sound that people still like. So I think that we're going to still find a place for an outstanding driving machine, in the same way that we can still, find technologies from the past that are unique and provide a particular experience. So.
Well, thank you, Paul. That's a great one. Well, that's a good take, and Paul, that's a great question. Speaking of question, this is the time in the Future Transform when we mingle. And what happens is I'm going to ask you all a question, and then Larry and I are going to climb down off of the stage and hang out with you guys. And so I'd like you to take the next 5 minutes to think about this question. And by thinking about it, I'd like you to talk to other people in the Future Transform. So if you feel like talking out loud, please click on another person or 2 people, and you would form a little couple or a trio where you can have a conversation. And Larry and I will be seeking to join you. Now, if you don't feel like talking with anybody else, that's fine. Mouse over your cursor, and you'll see a little icon for a lock. Click there, and nobody can just barge into you once you have that out. It's a kind of privacy setting. The question is, where do you see all this automation that Larry Johnson's been describing? Where do you see this impacting education in your world? So if you're at a Research One university, a community college, a library, a museum, if you're in Australia or Finland or America, how do you see this unfolding, let's say over the next 5 years, between now and when Ford rolls out its fleet of self-driving cars? How will automation impact education in your world? So let's take 5 minutes and discuss that, and then we'll come back up. Zach, bring us into the people. Well, welcome back, everyone. I've got to say the mingle sessions are one of my favorite parts because I love it when the no problem, Larry. The mingle sessions are when the participants, the audience, really get to take over, and I love that.
I was having a great conversation with Vanessa, and Vanessa, your last point was excellent. So we'll just close there, but maybe you can share it with the others when we go on. Sorry, Brian.
Oh, Vanessa is awesome. I'm
Yeah.
waiting to have Vanessa run the show because she is extraordinary. Um, I was talking with Ben Harwood and with Manuela Ekawa. Let me just bring Manuela up because she had a really great point. Zach, can you kick me off? Manuela on for a sec.
Hello.
No. So you have the stage.
Oh, so I have the stage. Okay, great. So the question that Brian asked us in response to how do we see automation being played out in higher ed, and I was sharing with him that I was reading this morning about how some universities are revamping their university websites to customize the experience for students. So, for instance, they're using these bots that you spoke about earlier to answer some very simple but can be complex processes that happen across all kinds of institutions. So students, for example, who are trying to register for courses, or they need more information about where to answer specific questions about financial aid, how to apply for housing. A lot of these, I guess, administrative kind of practices or things that students come up against every semester. Is universities finding ways to use technology to automate some of these processes to make it a little bit more efficient for both the student but also for the university, since these are questions that are constantly, they know they're constantly going to be coming up, and students are constantly going to have questions about, and usually typically now they would have to call or they would have to email and wait for an answer, or even go to the actual physical campus in order to get their questions answered. And so if there are ways that universities right on their website, right where that's student facing, and then the student knows that they can go to get some of these administrative questions answered very quickly, that would be, I think, an efficient use of new technologies in automating some of these processes.
That's an excellent point. And to that point too, that's actually low-hanging fruit these days,
Yeah.
because there are lots of companies that provide, you can build your own chatbot. There's sophisticated tools that companies like Microsoft have and others, but this is not a big hard thing. Really, you just think about what the challenge is, and there you go. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Welcome back.
That is a great point. Oh, thank you, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Um, Let me read out a question that came from the chat room. Now, this is from Ninket Anjaria. And if I've just massacred your name, Ninket, I'm really sorry. Ninket doesn't have AV, so let me just repeat what they wrote. I've thought about this question a lot, and I think that AI can be incredibly beneficial in tying together industry and education. Industry needs usually evolve at a much faster pace than that at which education adapts to them. Is there a way that education and pathways can always be relevant? What do you think, Larry? Great question.
Is there a way that education and pathways can always be relevant? God, I hope so. The directions that this is going to take are in industry, I think, are fairly obvious. They're going to solve problems in customer service. They're going to solve problems related to safety. They're going to be in areas where there's a business to be made in solving a problem that maybe people didn't even know they had. One of those problems is in helping people to decide who they want to be when they grow up, what career path to assume. And I know there are companies that are already working on sophisticated tools. Gates supports a lot of these sorts of efforts, but there are many other efforts as well to help people make good decisions early in their educational careers, both to minimize the amount of money that they have to spend on their education, but also to maximize the satisfaction that they're going to have from making the right match between their interest, skills, and the things that give them joy. And so intelligences that could help people sort through that are going to be very, very useful, and they're may not be as sophisticated as they will be one day, but I know for a fact that that's one area that is already seeing considerable development in it. And you know,
Well, that's a
one
great
reason
answer.
for it is because the job opportunities, the career choices that you can make, for the same reason we just talked about. What if automated tutors replace a big piece of teaching? How will that impact, employment? Well, it could change teaching in very positive ways. It could add new jobs that we don't even know about yet. How do you skate to the puck? Used a sports metaphor for that. You're young, you're in college, you want to have that satisfying career 10 years from then. What do you do today? Those are challenging questions, not just because the body of knowledge is big, but because the body of knowledge is changing.
I hate to turn to a cliche, but I think this might make the cliche real. We talk in higher education about lifelong learning, and we may actually see that really work. As those bodies of knowledge change drastically and as the economy changes, then it may be that going back to school as an adult several times becomes a smarter and smarter thing to do.
Yeah. So, we were talking in the break about lifelong learning and informal learning and do-it-yourself communities and those sorts of things. I think this is going to be fantastic for that sort of thing. And I think of my friends in the museum communities and the library communities that are already deeply thinking about serendipitous learning and how to make learning easy to have, in the moment. These sorts of intelligences are going to be a tremendous boon to them. So I can imagine, when you visit, a historic location or, the place where scientific discovery happened or something, that in the way that you can think about the audio tours, but imagine it times 10,000. Imagine if that were improved 10,000 times. I loved the slide that you used at the NMC Summer Conference that showed the two microchips. The one was 128 megabytes and the other was 128 gigabytes. And they were just 10 years apart. That's 1,000 times difference in capacity. When you look at the same time period in supercomputers, literally the multiple is 1,000,000 times. Yeah, and the numbers of calculations that are happening used to be measured in teraflops. Now they're measured in petaflops, and and the language, you have to go look it up to even know what they're talking about. It's so much capacity. Interesting times.
Well, I had another question to ask, but I wanted to bring Vanessa up because you guys had a chat and she had some questions. So, Zach, see if Vanessa can come up and boot me out so she can talk to Larry.
I'm feeling honored. Should I take a bow?
Yes.
Actually, that whole thing about the mores, Larry brought it out, and then it just it jumped out from both of us from there, because I was asking about the changes and sort of the cultural changes outside the classroom and the training and the workplace, which is what we end up talking about so much, but how it feeds out into regular life. And he jumped in, and then he talked, his example of the mores would be people are learning habits without having to been taught them. Cell phones, muting cell phones instead of so the whole business about don't turn on your cell phone in the theater is no longer a big deal. That the new customs are developing. It's a new culture. New customs are developing, and there will be people who are acquiring them without being aware of it, and others who will resist. And it just keeps on going from there. But I was sort of thinking out loud and thinking to myself in chat that some of this, that perhaps that when Brian started talking about with the lifelong learning, that perhaps our best preparation for this is to keep ready to learn how to learn. Sort of jump with the flow. When something changes directions, run and shift with it. And this is very hard for some people. And then some people do it to a certain extent without, again, like Maury's, being aware that they're doing it. It's just like if something is too difficult, they find another way to do it and don't think much about it. But thinking about how your personal best way to follow new knowledge. And it's not going to be, it's came across, I don't know, maybe I came up with it myself, but talk about instruction styles being idiosyncratic. And learning styles are learning how people learn is idiosyncratic. Everybody does it a little bit differently. And they may even learn different things in different ways. And if you've sort of experimented in a lot of different learning fields, then you've noticed how it's not always the same way. It's rarely the same way twice, but there's carryover in between. It's connected, but it's not the same way. So you can use what you learned about learning. That's why learning the third language is so much easier than learning the second one. When you learn the first one, you don't know you're learning it, so the rules aren't very helpful when you learn the second one. You learn the third one and you go, oh yeah, I've got some idea about what's the best way for me to learn a language. That's.
I think the point about the kinds of things that Sharon Turkle writes about, the isolation and that sort of thing, that once we find the conversations that we have among ourselves, turning from the technology to things like manners, that's when behaviors change. And so we had talked in our little one-on-one about how you don't have to legislate that sort of thing. Mores are more powerful than laws, they're more powerful than rules, and they don't have to be created. They're organic and they come out. I think we're already seeing some very interesting solutions and responses to that social isolation, which is still a relatively new phenomenon, that are going to mediate that.
Well, it sounds like we're looking at not just the advent of some new technologies, but we're looking at information in society in terms of cultural mores, in terms of practice, in terms of economics. I mean, I'm really glad that we can have sessions like this now where we can try and skate ahead of that puck to see where this could be going. Larry, we've got 4 minutes left, and we have so much to cover. I had one question to ask you based on all of this, which is I wanted to ask you about supervised and unsupervised learning. I think we've been discussing that without using the terms.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about machine learning, it's actually a collection of algorithms and techniques and analyses that come together, and also the way that you use data. So some data comes in and it's got a structure to it, so you know what the fields are, you know what to expect, the behaviors of a particular variable. Is it numeric, is it text, things like that you know about it in advance, that allow you to do things. And then there's unstructured data, which is just it's all of that. You don't necessarily have any pre-knowledge of what to do with it. And tools like Watson work with both. And so they work with not only structured data, which would be like the body of knowledge, it's got ISBNs and all sorts of things that organize it, but also looking at Twitter streams and other sorts of real-time data flows, to combine those. When you move that to the learning sphere, it becomes a little bit different conversation. They talk about supervised versus unsupervised learning. And this is very much parallel to how humans learn. You think about how kids learn when they're by themselves and they're playing. you know, and they're trying things, and it's play, but they're learning, and particularly young kids, really young kids. It's fascinating to watch them play and to watch how that works. Well, as we begin to develop really sophisticated neural networks, you see the same thing happening with artificial intelligences, and in particular with robots. And so supervised learning is where a human mediates, you know, so you do an experiment, it fails or it succeeds, you tweak your code, and you know, and then it can do what it couldn't do before. It can move its arm like this now, you know, or like that. Unsupervised learning, you give the machine a goal. And in a recent experiment that I was totally fascinated by, they taught a robot to walk. Now, how long has it taken General Dynamics to teach robots to walk? Years. You know, and they've done a very good job. You know, we all have seen the videos of people trying to kick over the four-legged robot and the two-legged robot, and you know, and you feel sorry for the robot. Why are they being mean to this robot? It's not nice. Yeah, but that's supervised learning, what they've done. Now, the new approach that's emerging is, what if we just gave the robot very simple goals? We didn't try to teach it to walk. We just said, keep your center of gravity a certain height above the ground, your torso. Keep your torso a certain height above the ground and move forward. Well, those are the two goals that they gave a robot recently, and it took the robot 6 hours of flopping around to learn to walk. And it would move itself one way. It would get data from that. The data would come back in. This is called a recurrent neural network, where you do an action, there's a result, that result becomes the input to the next action. And so the input becomes, that raised my torso. Cool, we're going to keep that in the success set. That didn't raise my torso, forget that. You know, that moved me forward. I'm still laying down, but I managed to move forward. Okay, keep that in the success set. Think about how many millions of calculations, you know, these machines can make in a second. 6 hours is, you know, trillions of iterations. Just think about how fast a machine that can learn to walk in 6 hours, all by itself, with two goals. I'm stunned. I'm thinking, wow.
I think that's so 2016, you know, that was so slow.
Yeah. Well, you think about, all right, so you take the very processes that a child uses to learn, and you automate those in a way that allows what takes a human child, you know, 12 years to learn to become, you know, a teenager, young adult, 12 or 18 years, you know, now we compress that into a matter of hours. And as you say, that's today, you know. I think we're living in a really super interesting time, and so I advise us all.
I feel like
space. It's gonna be fun.
I think you're absolutely right, and I'm delighted that we're able to have you in our space for an hour today, Larry. Thank you so much for such an exciting vision, and we're going to follow up with you with more questions.
I look forward to that. All right.
We're right out of time.
Hasta luego. Y hasta la próxima. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Good. Hasta la próxima. Zach, if you could bring up the slides. So this is when we wrap up the session, and this is when we get to point to what's happening next week. So I should say next week, our guest is going to be Manuela Ecao, who you heard from a few minutes ago. She's an education analyst at the New America Foundation, and she's going to be talking about a lot of stuff, including, among other things, access and equity in education. So I'm looking very much forward to seeing Manuela. Now, also, between now and then, our science fiction reading group is continuing. Last month, we read from Paolo Bacigalupi's The Water Knife. Now we're reading Ernest Cline's Ready Player One. So if you're interested in some great, exciting science fiction that helps us think about the near future of education, this is one title I strongly recommend. You can click on that URL or just go to my blog and follow post, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. And in the meantime, if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing, Either ftte.us will tell you more about future trends, and of course, shindig.com will tell you about Shindig. In the meantime, thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate all your comments. This is a very exciting topic. If anyone is here, I'm going to stick around for a few minutes. In the meantime, I'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.